In the far north of Russia, past the Arctic Circle, there is a slab of rusted metal bolted to the ground. It is about the width of a dinner plate. Snow drifts over it. Nobody guards it. Underneath that lid is the deepest hole human beings have ever made. It reaches more than 7.5 miles down. It took 20 years to dig, and then the people who dug it stopped, welded it shut, and walked away. This is the story of what they found down there, and of why nobody has ever gone back. It began, the way so much of the 20th century began, with two countries trying to beat each other. While the world watched the race to the moon, a second race was running in the opposite direction. Both superpowers had arrived at the same strange conclusion. The last unexplored frontier was not only above us, it was beneath our feet, and we knew less about it. We had photographed the far side of the moon before anyone had ever held a piece of rock from 10 miles beneath our own. The Americans moved first. Project Mohole set out to drill through the ocean floor, where the crust is thinnest, and touch the mantle below. In 1961, they drilled into the seabed off Mexico and proved it could be done. Then the budget swelled past $100 million, the goals blurred, and in 1966, Congress killed it. The Americans never reached the mantle. 4 years later, on a frozen peninsula near the Norwegian border, the Soviets started digging. They chose the Kola Peninsula for a reason. The rock there is among the oldest on the planet, nearly 3 billion years old, a slab of the world's first crust sitting close to the surface. Drilling into it would be like cutting into the oldest page of the oldest book we have, except that nobody had ever managed to open the book. Everything we believed about those pages, we had guessed from the outside. They built a derrick and a small town to house the workers and settled in for what everyone assumed would be a few years of work. In its best years, the site ran around the clock with hundreds of people living beside it in the snow. The hole they made was narrower than you might imagine, just 9 inches across, 9 inches wide, and a target of 9 miles deep. Imagine threading a needle downward through solid stone for 2 decades. And every foot of it had to be brought back up, one section of pipe at a time. A single trip down to the bottom and back could take the better part of a day. They were not digging blind. Geologists had a map of what waited below, drawn from decades of listening to earthquakes. Seismic waves bend and bounce when they cross from one kind of rock into another. Read those echoes carefully, and you can sketch the layers you cannot see. The map said this: granite near the top. Then, somewhere around 4 miles down, a clean boundary. Below that boundary, the granite should give way to basalt. Darker, denser, heavier rock. Geologists had a name for that line. They had taught it for decades. They were certain it was there. The drill passed 4 miles. They checked the instruments. They checked the samples. And the boundary was not there. There was no basalt. There was granite, and then more granite, and then still more granite all the way down. The line the seismic echoes had drawn was real, but it was not a change of material. It was the same rock, crushed and cooked by pressure until it had changed its character without changing its nature. One of the most confident predictions in geology had been wrong, not slightly wrong, wrong about what the planet is made of. And that was the first of the surprises. About 4 miles down, in rock that should have been bone dry, the drill found water. Not water that had trickled from above, sealed water with nowhere to have come from. The best explanation is that pressure had squeezed hydrogen and oxygen out of the surrounding minerals and forced them together, drop by drop, with a lid of solid rock trapping it in place. Then came the strangest thing they pulled out of that hole. In the cores from around 4 miles down, under a microscope, they found Fossils. 24 species of single-celled plankton. Microscopic shells, perfectly preserved. Life that had floated in a sea 2 billion years ago, when the world had barely learned how to be alive. Buried, pressed, heated, folded into the crust, and carried down into the dark. They should have been destroyed. Nothing that delicate survives that pressure and that heat. And yet there they were, in a rock cylinder, in a tray, in a shed, in the Arctic. Hauled up through 4 miles of pipe by men who had gone looking for minerals and found a graveyard instead. Among the oldest traces of living things ever recovered from inside the earth. But the hole was fighting back. The engineers had budgeted for heat. At 9 miles, they expected around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot, but manageable. What they met instead, far shallower than planned, was 356. Nearly double the forecast. And heat that extreme does something to rock that nobody had planned for. Stone stops behaving like stone. It softens, it creeps. The walls of the borehole began to flow inward, slowly closing the very hole that had just been drilled. Imagine drilling into candle wax that is quietly setting behind you. Drill bits wore out in hours. Sections of pipe snapped and were lost, and the crew had to abandon that branch and start a new one from higher up. The hole stopped being a hole. It became a tangle of branches like the roots of a tree, each one reaching a little further than the last. And in 1989, the deepest of those branches stopped at 12,262 meters, 7.5 miles, a record that has never been broken. Nobody has come closer since, and nobody is currently trying. They kept trying for 3 more years. They never gained another inch. And then something happened that no drill bit could survive. The country that was paying for the hole ceased to exist. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the funding went with it. The project closed in 1995. The buildings were stripped, the windows broke, snow came in through the roofs, the tower came down, the instruments went for scrap. Within a few winters, the place looked 100 years old. In 2008, the site was abandoned for good, and the mouth of the deepest hole on Earth was capped and welded shut. That rusted lid is all that is left. You may have heard a different ending. That the drill broke into a hollow chamber, that microphones were lowered, and that what came back up was screaming. That story is not true. It was invented, spread by radio, and repeated until it felt like history. And it is a shame, because the true version is stranger. We did not find hell down there. We found something harder to accept, that we had been wrong about the ground we stand on. In my opinion, the most uncomfortable thing about Kola is not that they stopped. It is why we have not started again. We have spent the decades since sending machines to Mars, landing probes on comets, photographing the shadow of a black hole, all of it magnificent. But we have not once tried to beat a record set in 1989 by men working in the snow with Soviet steel. We map the ocean floor from orbit and the sky with telescopes, and the one part of this planet we could physically touch, we have left alone for 35 years. Somewhere along the way, we decided that the interesting direction was up. I am not sure the evidence supports that. Because here is the number that stays with me. The Earth is roughly 4,000 miles to its center. We got 7.5. If the planet were an apple, we would not have broken the skin. The deepest we have ever reached is still essentially the surface. Everything below it, we know only by echo. We have stood on this planet our whole lives, and we have never once seen inside it.